And it's important to remember that cash flow isn't the be all and end all, right? Because if you have $1 million of cash flow, but you've got 2 clients, you don't have a business, you don't have a practice, you don't have something that's sellable. If you have $1 million of cash flow and you're working 80 or 100 hours a week in your practice, you got a job, you don't have a business, right?
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hi, Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And we have a fascinating one for you today. This particular episode is going to touch everything from helping you have a great life to thinking about niching with a great practice and wrestling with the question, as you build your law firm, regardless of your role inside the law firm, team member, associate, legal assistant, owner, what are the core things that make the law firm valuable? So I've got a unique guest with a unique perspective and who's also a long-term member of the Atticus community. With that, Ed Alexander, welcome to the episode.
Thank you, Steve. Glad to be here.
That's great to have you here. And you're in such a unique position to talk about this. And I just want our audience to understand a little bit of your background, because the core of what I want you to focus on is what are the things that drive the value in a law firm. And you own part of a law firm brokerage. You advise lawyers in buying and selling their practice. But before we get into that, I want people to actually understand the context of why you have such a unique perspective and a unique insight on this particular topic. Does that work for you?
That works for me, Steve.
Okay, so let's just start with the first question. And I get criticized by my colleague and co-producer, co-writer, co-conspirator in the Great Life, Great Podcast, Great Life, Great Practice episodes. I don't do enough talking about great life. So Ed, in preparing for this, I realized that you actually have a pretty great life. And I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions to highlight things, because you're kind of living what we like to see our members do, which is going for that great life experience. So talk to me about what you love to do and who you love to do it with.
So Steve, let's see. I do love to do a lot of things. That's one thing there, right? So first off, I am a super biker. I absolutely love getting out on the bike. I own way too many bikes. I've got a bike for every reason, every season, that kind of thing. I love to get out and kayak. Florida is an absolutely wonderful place to do kayaking. And I love to spend time with my wife and my 2 kids. Now, the 2 kids are older. They're out of the house. They all have careers of their own. And so it's just me and my wife most times now. But we've been together for 40 years this year. So our 40th anniversary is coming up. And I love the life I live.
Congratulations. And talk for a minute about your kids, because you've got 2, my recollection is some pretty remarkable kids.
So my oldest is a lawyer in South Florida. She has her own practice in the first party property, so suing insurance companies for homeowners and commercial property owners. And she's got, I think, 3 or 4 attorneys working for her. She's got a really nice practice. And then my youngest is completing her OBGYN residency in Brooklyn, New York. So that's actually where we're headed next month. We're going to go up and visit her for a weekend, and then I'm going to do a week-long bike tour. So great combination of activities.
So congratulations on a 40-year relationship with your wife. Huge, huge thing. And congratulations on raising 2 overachieving, remarkable children. So, that's pretty impressive.
Thank you. My wife and I always say we hit the parent lottery. So if we hit no other winning in life, we're good. We're very happy with that.
Yeah, but you're also a very interesting guy from the perspective that prior to law, you were in a different field and you're actually recognized. I think it's fair to say that you're an inventor. So let's talk about that for a minute. What was the invention? Because you own a patent. Talk to me a little bit about that pre-law background.
Prior to becoming a lawyer, I was a systems engineer. So I developed the circuits that devices really, because they're integrated circuits, the little chips you see on if you look at behind the computer and look inside, you see those little black chips. So was designing those in the 1980s when the car industry was transitioning from the analog to digital. And so we were designing those systems as a vendor to the car companies. So that was pretty fascinating. And then I moved over to a different company and actually invented a laser scanner that is still in use today. If you go to Bed Bath and Beyond, I guess if they're still in business, but if you go to a retailer and you have that wedding registry, right? You can take it around and scan the barcodes, and it'll put together the wedding registry. Well, that combination of a computer and a scanner was my invention way back in 1990. Well, the patent came out in 95, but it was 93 that it was invented.
It's amazing because you're a very creative guy, and that comes through in a lot of different ways in the way that you've built your practice and set up your practice. But you're also a community contributor. Like, you've done a lot of things in the community. So talk to me about your experience with the incubator program at University of Central Florida.
I have been working with the UCF incubator program for probably, let's see, I think I started way back in 95. It's changed over the years. There wasn't really an incubator program there, and then there was, but, I worked with them. I just enjoyed working with these new startup companies. I think that might have been part of it, with the technology piece from before, and seeing these other technology companies. I really enjoyed that.
But you've also done a tremendous amount of volunteer work, is my recollection. I mean, you've done some pro bono work and won an award for that. I think you won the Jake Stone Distinguished Service Award. So talk about your commitment to that, please.
That was basically pro bono work for abused and dependent children in the Orange County area. So we would act as guardian ad litem and represent really their interests. There's a pull between the state and between the parents, and we're trying to come down and the middle of the road, or really just to say what's in the best interest of the child.
And you did that for how long?
From 96 until probably, well, I still have a case now. So I guess now I had more cases when I was, probably in my 40s and 30s, but I still have a case now.
And so you've got this incredible commitment to community, commitment to family, commitment to travel, commitment to biking and kayaking. So you really have built quite a great life if you look at it. And I want to take a moment to just spend some time there. But I'd like to now pivot to your practice, because you have a very unique practice. We'll put your website up. Obviously, we'll give a lot more information about how to get some of the books and guides that you've written. But talk to me about the idea and vision you had from your practice and why you built it in the way that you did.
So it's interesting, I often will go back and forth, right? So I start out with a practice. It's me. I did that in really 2005. I had a prior iteration in the late 90s, but really it was 2005 that I started this. And I had focused on business because that's all I ever did. I mean, I went to law school specifically to be a business lawyer because of my experience in the tech world, right? And so came out, did business work, and always was looking. I like to find patterns. I don't know. I just try and think about what's going on. What are the things, right? So I saw tech related patterns, and then I began to see lawyers really opening up to the possibility of selling their practice, but it was very clunky. Right. And so I applied the business skills that I learned in the tech world, and also went out and created a brokerage with a really excellent partner who really knows his stuff in that area, and kind of merged all those together to look at, okay, well, there are a bunch of lawyers out there who have these great assets, and so many of them just close these practices down, and it just seems to me to be an absolute tragedy. So as I'm seeing this happen, you notice, oh well, this person's trying to sell and they're having this problem and this person. And so, trying to put all that together and synthesize, how can we best help lawyers exit their practices, right? And that could be from the point of, hey, I don't really have anything, how do I close this down, all the way to, I'm going to go out and market that practice in the broader world and try and find a buyer for it.
That's interesting because the perspective that I've seen, and this is aimed at lawyers and their teams, because it's a critical element of a team member to understand the long-term play, the long-term role that they'll serve inside the organization. But I've seen a lot of younger lawyers drive by this incredible opportunity about how to build their law firm so it's valuable enough to a buyer. And some of the older lawyers don't really pay that much attention to it until they suddenly say, okay, I'd like to transition or sell my practice. And they sometimes have what I would call, and this is my term, not yours, Ed, a shag carpet practice. And I looked at acquiring a couple of practices when I was practicing, and I would go into this office and the guy was, 70, 75 years old. Marge worked for him. They had Tandy computers. They had cables running across the floor and literally had like shag carpet and would want a significant amount of money for this practice. And his argument was, hey, look, I got a great phone number and I've got all these wonderful old files, but my clients are my friends. Whenever they say that, that means my pricing is probably 80% below market. And you look at this and you're like, this is not a asset. This is a liability. This is a shag carpet practice, because they had not thought about it. Like they had not really built that firm with the intention of making it valuable enough to sell. So I think what you're going to help us think about is incredibly valuable to no matter where you're at in the organization, no matter where you're at in your life cycle of growing a practice. But there's one unique element I would like you to spend some time on so people can also appreciate the great practice angle. You actually started as one of the original practice advisors at Atticus back in the day before it was called Atticus. So let's talk about that for a few minutes, because your insight as a practice advisor not only shows up in the practice, but it also shows up in the brokerage. It also shows up in your advising of attorneys. It also shows up as a incredible source of wisdom to help lawyers think about how do they build a practice that's valuable enough to sell. So talk to me for a few minutes about that, please.
So when I first became a lawyer, I ended up working at the tech firm that I was at. And then I ended up coming down here and quickly learned that you had to build a practice. Otherwise, you were going to be stuck behind a desk and just billing hours all the time. And it's funny, there was this guy called Mark Powers who put an ad in the Orange County Bar Briefs. And I was reading it and I said, oh, maybe this guy could help me. And Mark and I connected up at that point in time and had a great relationship. And then at one point, I was ready to sell the practice I had. I hadn't really developed it the way the practice is today. And so a friend of mine was interested in buying a practice and I sold it to him. And I went in and worked for Atticus as a practice advisor. And I did that for a number of years and really enjoyed it. I mean, I would present with Patrick and Glenn, and we would represent. Well, I guess advise clients, as their practice advisors, and really got a wealth of knowledge. I mean, absolute wealth of knowledge, because you got to touch so many different practices, right? And I just ate up the whole idea of the business of law. I love the business of law. And that really is part of what led me into this niche. It's just a natural thing that I just enjoy reading about and setting things up and all of that. David Maister's books at the time, they were new and really interesting for me. And then, you start to follow on with general business books. So great stuff. I loved what we were doing, but at one point in the process, I decided, I really wanted to build my own law firm because now I had all this great knowledge and I wanted to go out there. But I will tell you that, from those early days, I really owe Mark and Sean a real debt of gratitude because they absolutely helped me develop this practice. And I will be forever grateful to them for that.
They'll be thrilled to hear it. They'll be thrilled to hear it. And I think that more importantly, they'll be thrilled that you built such a unique niche practice, which is one of the things I love about it, because you took everything that you learned and built a practice that's in alignment with your lifetime legacy, in alignment with your goals, in alignment with your values, which is one of the things I wanted to bring you on the podcast to discuss. But at the same time, because you've walked the talk and you are walking the talk. So when you give advice to lawyers about how to build a practice that has value, you're coming from a very unique perspective from an inventor, a guy who's got a great life, great relationship with a family, great community contributions, great leadership, have been a practice advisor, been in Dominate Your Market, worked with practice advisors, worked with other organizations, but you've got a huge pedigree. And I'll mention your website right now, as I believe it's orlandobusinesslawyer.com. And we're going to give a whole bunch of links in the show notes on how to listen to other things that you've written on and how to download your book, things like that. But it's important to me that the audience understands that you're a full spectrum human being. Like, you've totally integrated great practice, great life at a level that most people don't quite appreciate. So when you talk about the values and the value drivers inside a law firm, it comes from a very unusual, unique, and powerful perspective. Not like an accountant going, hey, look, these are things to consider when you value a law firm. You've got an incredible perspective. So are you okay if we pivot?
Yes, absolutely.
While we could spend time talking about, how to sell a law firm, we could spend some time talking about how to buy a law firm. We could talk about some of the thinking in your book, which is a guide to selling your law firm, which I'm going to give a show note and a shout out saying, if you guys are interested in building a law firm for sale, you want to read Ed's book, you want to check out all of Ed's content, because Ed can give you some great thinking. But today, I want you to just spend time with us, giving us advice from your unique perspective, your unique perch in life, and tell us what are the 5 critical things that you think drive value in a law firm. So as people work towards building, so as people work towards staffing, as people work towards marketing, they can use these 5 strategies as a guidepost. Does that work for you?
Absolutely. That works.
Well, tell me what number 1 is. If you said, Steve, if you're going to build a law firm from scratch, these are the 5 most critical things I want you to focus on. So when you build it up, you can call me and I can broker it and sell a very valuable law firm that, more importantly, will work for the owner. I mean, more importantly, work for the buyer, if that makes sense.
Right.
So fire
right.
away.
So I think it's important that we have a common definition, right? So value of the law firm, right? So how is value determined? So just broadly, value is determined through cash flow and then function, and that's a function of the risk of that cash flow continuing into the future, right? And so most of the things that you want to focus on are going to be risk side, but they're also going to enhance the cash flow side, right? And it's important to remember that cash flow isn't the be all and end all, right? Because if you have $1 million of cash flow, but you've got 2 clients, you don't have a business, you don't have a practice, you don't have something that's sellable. If you have $1 million of cash flow and you're working 80 or 100 hours a week in your practice, you got a job, you don't have a business, right? So there's this cash flow component, and that cash flow has to be generated by an operating business, right? So what I'm going to talk about in terms of these value drivers really affect that concept of the risk factor more than anything else. Okay. So the first is the owner mindset, right? This can't be understated, right? The first part of it is that as a lawyer, you practice law, that's great. But as a law business owner, you have to focus on the fact that you own a business that provides legal services. And when you can get those two separate in your mind, you can look at it and say, well, as the lawyer, I'm going to do these things in accordance with the rules, and I'm going to practice the right way and do all those things. But as a business owner, I need to be innovative. I need to implement things that are going to make this practice separate and apart from me, right? So I can still practice in the practice, but it's not dependent on me. So that if I wanted to, I could hire an attorney to sit in my seat and do the work that I do, right? And then I've got this business on the side. So that's the first part of that mindset.
I was going to say, I want to stay there just for a moment because this is the most elusive and probably the most important for me. So the two tricks that I've used in my own practice in advising clients are pretty simple, but I want your feedback and your wisdom from doing this for 25 plus years. So the two tricks I have to keep in my head, is this a lawyer hat I'm wearing? Very simple. Or is this a business owner hat that I'm wearing? Because if I'm making a decision about a case, then I got to make sure I'm wearing my lawyer hat. And I will be very risk adverse. I will be very cautious, very protective, following the law, following the rules, and very, very, very protective over my client because that's my job. As a business owner, if I put my business owner hat, and it's hard for me to transition from, lawyer to business owner in the moment. I have to consciously say, okay, is this a business decision or a legal decision? Because I have my legal skills and then I have my business skills. And if I wear my business owner hat, then I've got my business skills to play with. But as a business owner, I have to be okay with risk. I have to be okay with messy. I have to be okay with trying new things. I have to be okay with taking some money and investing in a marketing campaign that may or may not work. I have to take some risk. And I think lawyers, as we're trained, are risk adverse. So, what advice would you give someone to practically think about? Am I in my owner mindset or am I in my lawyer mindset? How would you help distinguish that more?
Well, I think you've delineated it really well with the idea that when I'm focused on cases and client representation, I'm the lawyer. When I'm guiding somebody who is a paralegal or an attorney who's working on a case, I'm doing it as a lawyer. But pretty much everything else in the law firm is all business oriented, and it helps me to recognize when kind of it's the meta approach to looking at yourself and saying, hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable here. Why am I feeling uncomfortable? Right. So take that step back and look at it and say, okay, well, am I feeling uncomfortable because the lawyer is talking? Or am I feeling uncomfortable because I can't afford this risk? Or I just need certainty and I can't take the risk now, right? So understanding who you are at the moment and what you're feeling at the moment and being able to take that step back is crucial so that you don't make emotional decisions about any of this, but in particular about your business, right?
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to spend a moment there because it's something I've struggled with for, I don't know, 1, 2, 20, 30 years, and want to see if you had a great insight. And that was because you're really saying acknowledge the momentary fear, discomfort, and pull back the curtain, see what the why is and what's happening, because that might instruct you. Is this the lawyer speaking? Is this the business owner speaking? What's going on? Or is it just straight up unmitigated fear, holding me back from making a decision or, taking a risk? So that's perfect. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to
Yeah,
clarify.
no, let me add something in there because in the DYM program, right, and I don't know what it looks like today, but in the DYM program, we had talked about the brain, and we talked about kind of the lizard brain and the prefrontal cortex and all of that, right? So really, what you're looking at is that your lizard brain is doing something, right, and your lizard brain is generating that fear or euphoria or whatever it ends up being, and taking that moment to step back and let your prefrontal cortex understand what that is, not necessarily try and tamp it down, but to understand it so that you can really figure out, okay, well, that's just my lizard brain going off right now. Let me understand that, let me feel it, and then I'll go back over here and let my prefrontal cortex make this decision.
I just realized right now most of the lawyers that give me feedback of what they don't like about the podcast are going to say things like, well, how does this make me money? And they're just completely going to drive by. You just told them the secret to making money is recognizing how you respond emotionally to risk and paying attention to that and then analyzing that and engaging the prefrontal cortex versus having the amygdala run wild. So well done. Very well done. Would you like to try strategy number 2?
Yes. So the next one is having marketing processes in place that basically focus on relationship development and do it in a way that leverages people and technology, as long as the people aren't you most of the time, right? Now, there are certain things that you, as the business owner, as the lawyer, have to do in terms of relationship marketing. No one else can do it. But if everything has to get done by you, then that's a problem. And then there are things that you can leverage, right? So we do a print newsletter. We send out that print newsletter, and every time we do, we get referrals off of that print newsletter. And does it take time? Yeah, we got to write it. We've got to submit it to the vendor that we use. And by the way, just an aside there, you writing it is very important because your voice is what continues that relationship, right? They want to know about you. And so having that newsletter that talks about your life as much as anything else, right? And probably has little or limited amounts of articles on legal things, right? But talks about you as the lawyer, is invaluable, really is, that constant ongoing communication. Now, I know people will say, hey, let's do it as an e-newsletter. And okay, well, that's better than nothing to do it as an e-newsletter. But my preference is a print newsletter because if nothing else, it gets into the mailbox. And if they don't read it, they still see your name at the top of it. But when an email comes in, it's very easy to send it over to the spam folder and just delete it without even knowing that it came from you.
That's fantastic. Craig Goldenfarb, who runs a massive PI practice, would 100% agree with you on the print newsletter. So he thinks it's a critical element, regardless of the amount of investment you have to make in producing it and sending it out. So I'm with you. I do want to put a footnote or a side note because something I want to try and connect the dots from other episodes for our listeners. One of the things that you're doing, and I'm going to encourage people to go to your website and check it out, is that you are masterful at using what Robert Rose would call content marketing. So we're having Robert Rose come to the summit and speak about content marketing. I've assigned Robert's book in the past in Dominate Your Market on content marketing. But really what you've done is you've done a masterful job of leveraging your expertise through content marketing. Newsletter is content marketing. You're talking about content. You're talking about making yourself human and relevant to your clients and prospects. And you've done a masterful job with it. You really have. It's hyper niched, hyper unique, but it's very well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hi, it's Steve. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but if you're new to Atticus and you're listening to our podcast and you don't understand how a practice advisor works, in this particular case, you're listening to an interview that features a practice advisor who's really coaching and advising someone how to grow their practice. If you're curious on how to work with a practice advisor, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, and I'm going to give you a complimentary, no-charge practice growth diagnostic. So you can talk to one of our membership directors about how to work with a practice advisor. That if you've never had the opportunity to work one-on-one with one of our top flight practice advisors, I'm going to encourage you, as you listen to this episode, ask yourself, would somebody like this be able to help me and help me grow my practice and help me cultivate a great life? With that, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
So the next one on that line of the marketing processes would be the authority and goodwill. You've touched a little bit on it there, right? Because we're writing on that topic or a particular topic. That, to some extent, presupposes a bit of a niche, right? Because it's easier to do content on a niche than it is to do content on a practice area. And that's an important distinction. A niche is not a practice area, right? So it's a practice area plus a vertical, right? Now, some people would say you could do a geographic niche. I guess to some extent you could, but I like verticals better. I think that those are real niches there. And then so the idea with all authority is be the guy, be the gal, right? Who is the person you need to talk to on this. So building that authority. So if you have that, then you're going to develop goodwill in the marketplace, and essentially that goodwill will transfer to a buyer, and as part of the sale process. So
You've done a great job also of adopting a clear practice model, and your practice model is that of the expert's expert, which supports your content marketing theme around authority and credibility. So once again, well done.
Thank you. So the next one is really systems and
so this is strategy 3. Sorry to interrupt. Ed. Strategy 3. Okay.
Strategy number 3 is systems, and the systems I think are really most important are the client services systems. So making sure that people are proactive, having a process so I don't have to rely on somebody to remember that they have to do it. It's basically coming up and telling, okay, this is the next step in the process. This is the by when for this. This is reach out and communicate with the client, that type of thing. Now, I do want to say, all of these things, no firm is absolutely perfect, right? Every firm has holes and problems and things of that nature. So you shouldn't look at these and say, oh my God, I've got to do all of them 100% to be able to have a saleable firm. But you want to get to 60, 70, 80% on, and maybe there's one that you get to 100 and the others are a little bit lower, but they're all factors in it.
I think for some firms, I like your number, 50 to 60%, it's a pretty viable success rate, especially if you consider that some firms are at probably 0%, if that makes sense. So for me, I think, and I always encourage our clients, you just don't have to be 100% better than your biggest competitor or your next competitor. You just have to be about 10% better, 20% better. So if you're 10 to 20% ahead on customer service, on process, you're going to look very, very valuable to somebody. So thank you.
And the beauty of process there is it helps remove the owner from the day to day, right? So instead of the owner being the one to answer every single question and in Atticus speak, be the hero, right? We can move the owner into, at the very least, the manager position, right? So, and that's a much better position for purposes of sale. You can't sell a firm and be the hero of the firm. It just ultimately doesn't work.
I think that's probably the core message for me that you just highlighted that I didn't really think about until you highlighted it in that moment, that if you are designing a firm in which you're the hero of the story and the client is not the hero of the story, you're probably designing a firm that's going to be very difficult to sell because the firm is about you. And if it's about you, it's ultimately founder dependent. You can't get out of the founder dependency trap. I think the only way you can flip it is to make it about the client and their experience and eliminate yourself in that heroic model. So I think you nailed that.
Excellent. And then kind of tangentially related would be this team approach, right? So that that the people on your team, number one, understand the mission, right? And are on board with what the mission is, or core values, whatever you want to call it, right? They understand that. But then at the same time, that you have in place a group that will transition to the buyer, right? And one of the things that we talk about with owners all the time, law firm owners all the time, is this issue of goodwill, right? Because lawyers naturally think, oh, the clients come because of me, right? I'm the lawyer, right? And
I'm sorry, I'm laughing just because, yes, keep going,
yeah.
sorry.
So this idea that now, okay, well, how do we transition the goodwill to the firm? We transition the goodwill to the firm because we take a team approach. because everybody is touching the client, because everybody is doing something in that process. And the client doesn't have to reach out to the lawyer every time. In fact, it's absolutely the right thing to do to have the clients reach out to the team. And so the team satisfies all the client requirements and everything else. And you, as the attorney, are only doing things that require your skill set, the highest and best use that you have. And sometimes that might be communicating with the client, and other times it's not. Um, and one way to do this would be, the way I like to suggest that people implement it is to do a no unscheduled inbound calls policy, so that if a client calls in, of course, you gotta have parameters around what's a true emergency, those kinds of things. But if a client calls in, then your team can schedule, and typically that's a period of time out, or the team can take and try and answer the question, even if they have to come to you to get the information to answer the question and get back to the client. So that's one way to really instill the team approach. The other way is during the client intake, whoever's doing the intake. If it's the attorney, you really don't want that to be the attorney all the time, right? There are some instances when it needs to be the attorney, absolutely positively. But if you have an intake process that does not rely on the owner, that's the better way to do it. But in that intake process, to introduce the team approach to the prospective client there, that sets everything out on the right foot and gets things rolling along, so that the client isn't expecting to only talk to Ed or only talk to Steve.
You realize that there's lawyers that are listening to this. They're feeling like you're taking their superhero cape around them and choking them with it. Non-lawyer initial, team-centric, no interruptions in your approach. Only say it again. How did you call your phone policy?
No unscheduled inbound telephone calls.
No, this is where the system engineer part of you comes back. No unscheduled inbound phone calls, which basically means, it's a fantastic barrier to interruptions, and it's a great policy, and is a great way of putting your team in an empowered role. Well done. Excellent. Very good.
Good. Great. And then the last one is great financial records. You would be surprised.
This is our last strategy?
That is correct. Yes. Number
Okay.
5. So strategy number 5 is great financial records. You would be surprised, Steve, at how many firms have absolutely horrible financial records. And so the indirect piece of this is, you've got to have an accountant. You've got to have a bookkeeper. You can't be doing this yourself, right? And
you're just going to upset lawyers everywhere. You mean I can't do my own books?
you cannot do your own books. First off, it's probably $125 an hour activity. And I think that every lawyer listening to this should have an hourly rate well above $125 an hour.
I'm with you on that.
Okay, so number one, it's not worth your time to do it. But number two, you don't do it well, right? Unless you happen to be a CPA and a lawyer, but most of us aren't. So you're not going to do it well.
I am amazed at how many lawyers I know that have a 7-figure net income that I can't get them to step away from QuickBooks and delegate it because they don't trust the person, or they're delegated so many other things that this is at least one thing they get to still do inside their organization. It's fascinating. It's totally fascinating to me. And it's one of the last things I see lawyers with a low trust in their team or in outside relationships give up. And they're making a significant amount of income. It's not about the 125 an hour. It's more about, I'm just scared of trusting someone to do this. Now, there's plenty of ways we can cross-check and make sure the quality work is going with. But I really like where you're going. So I'm sorry to interrupt. Keep going. I just found it interesting.
Well, I mean, ultimately, if you think about it, when buyers come in and they look at a firm, they're looking at it, and they're lawyers, so they're risk averse. They're scared. And so if you have crappy financial records, then that's just one more red flag that they're trying to find a reason not to move forward with this, right? And so giving them perfect, or near perfect financial record says, oh, well, these people care about the practice. They're doing it right. They're keeping the information right. And I'm not going to find, little landmines in the financial statements that are going to send me my loser brain going through the roof, running away. Right. So
They're not
crucial.
hiding anything, right? They're not
Exactly.
hiding anything. It's very
Exactly.
hard to hide something in clean financial records.
Yeah. So, and just going back to the issue, because I agree with you, there's so many lawyers that will not give that up. At the end of the day, there's no public company CEO that's doing any of that. They're looking at reports. They're not doing it. And there are controls that can be put in place, as simple as separating out who looks at the checks versus who's doing the check writing, right? And it's okay if you're really concerned, then be the one to sign the checks so you can get to see what all the checks are and you can ask questions about it. But don't write the checks. Don't record the transactions. Don't do the bank reconciliation. None of that is helping you build a good practice.
Well, let's stay, and I thank you for that because it doesn't make me crazy. Let's stay there for a moment on the finances. If you think about some of the things that lawyers will utilize as ways of driving down their net to decrease income tax liability, I've seen a couple things, and I'll give you some examples, and I'd like you to kind of comment on them and tell me anything else that you see. Because if you're selling a firm and the buyer's looking at your net income, and then the buyer says, yeah, well, don't get too uptight about that because I also pay my spouse, X amount of money. I also lease a car, which is obvious. I also, run $5,000 a month in Amazon expenses. And I also do X, Y, and Z to try and drive down my net because that's what my CPA tells me to do. Talk to me about what what you've seen and what your thoughts are on that.
So what you're talking about is what we call discretionary expenses. So they're the expenses that an owner runs through the business legitimately, maybe not legitimately, I don't know, that then is deductible to reduce the overall net income coming out of the firm. So what we typically see is that's the owner's automobile. It's the spouse who's getting a salary for a no-show job. It's travel. It's meals and entertainment, right? Those are the key ones. And then there are others, maybe you pay for the internet at home and, pay for the maintenance of the house through the firm. I don't know about being legitimate, but those are what I've seen. And you see the gamut. The key here to this is that we create a recast of the firm's financial results, and we add those back in, right? So the idea is we're going to show a correct picture of what the firm earning potential is, but we have to document all of that, right? So if you're saying, hey, we took a vacation and we attached an ABA meeting to it or whatever, right? Well, we need some documentation that shows that this needs to be accurate. And once it's accurate, we can make that deduction or adjustment, I guess is really the right. But the other thing to remember is, and then we see this a lot too, you're underpaying a spouse who's working in the business, or you're not paying rent on a building you own. Some things like that, where instead of adding back that expense, we now have to deduct more money, because if somebody from the outside comes in and takes your spouse's position and we have to pay them $50,000 a year and you're only paying your spouse 20, well, then there's a 30,000 deduct against the net income of the firm. So it works both ways. We do normalize everything to try and show what the firm's true cash flow potential is.
That's very good because you see, I hate to use this term, but you see lawyers putting their family to work at low and below market pay and then brag about how profitable their firm is, but they're kind of cheating on the profitability game because they're having somebody work for free or below market. I've seen this multiple times in businesses where somebody goes to sell the business or tries to, negotiate the sale of a business. and they have family working there, and the families, kids have been working there for years, and they're all way below market. And you're looking at, well, that's, three kids that are, one's running the manufacturing department, this one's doing that, this one's doing that. We're probably under market by, $200,000, $300,000 a year that's coming off the bottom line. I mean, that's contributing to the bottom line that we need to adjust. So that's excellent. I had not thought of that. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, these adjustments are really the key in presenting a good picture of what the firm is, so that somebody can come in and really understand, what's the value proposition here, what's the cash flow coming out of it.
Ed, you've done a great job talking about strategies. If there's one mistake that you could help lawyers not make, that you could say, this is kind of a deal killer right here. This is a problem. I don't know how to fix it for you. That you could right now tell people who are listening how to get ahead of this mistake so they don't fall into this trap. What would that mistake be?
Well, Steve, that would be setting up the compensation plan for non-owner attorneys in the firm, right? And I've seen problems. So, for example, we've encountered one firm in particular that was paying an exorbitant amount to an attorney for origination by that attorney. And if you kind of look at the way law firms work, right, you should be at probably 35% kind of net seller benefit. So everything that comes to the owner, whether that's your car and your travel and your salary and your profit and all of that, comes out to somewhere in the neighborhood of 35, maybe 40% in really well-run firms. And then, so you've got to have all your costs in all the other percentage, right? And so that's where kind of the rule of thirds comes from, is you set compensation at 1/3 of billings or collections. You have your overhead be 1/3 of collections, and then the profitability should be about 1/3 of that. And so what you've got to make sure to do is not be outside the norm by very much, because as you get outside the norm, what you're cutting into is the profit. And so if you think about it a little bit, what you're really doing is treating the the non-owner attorney as an owner, because you're giving them a portion of the profit. Now, there are limited circumstances when you can do that, right? So if I'm just going to use round numbers here, right? So if, let's say, the attorney is making $100,000 a year, we want them to collect $300,000 on their time. So then for each dollar above that $300,000, now we can pay them a little more because we've covered some of the fixed overhead, right? But what we can't do is give them so much that it just completely obliterates the profitability. And so I've seen that going forward, where essentially the profitability is impacted. Now, when somebody comes in, the profitability, if somebody buys whatever, the profitability is what they're buying, right? And so as you're then reducing that profitability more and more and more, there's less to buy. So getting that compensation plan right, and that means it's right based on your overhead, it's right based on the collections from that attorney, and similarly for paralegals as well. But you don't have profit problems with paralegals, but same thing, rule of thirds. And you get those right, you preserve the profit for the owner. So that right there is just really the key element to making sure that your firm is saleable. And if you mess that up, it's very difficult to change, because you got to go back to an attorney and say, hey, I got to change your comp plan because it's too rich. And that never ends well.
That's not going to work. So in this case, and it's one of the things I've been working on a lot in Dominate Your Market, like how to build profit centers, understanding how to structure profit centers that don't have the owner in it. In the firm that you saw this as a mistake, what percentage was going to the associate, the non-owner attorney, that you found to impact the profit? What was that number?
60%.
Oh, that's huge. So they were getting 60%. So they basically were unless they had like no overhead, like the firm had no overhead, it wouldn't make a lot of sense financially based
Right.
on using the rule of thirds.
So they weren't losing money, but they weren't making money off that attorney because the 40% would go to costs, right? Or something like that. So maybe they were making, I don't know, 5 points, something like that, but they wouldn't make a reasonable amount of money given the risk profile and all of that.
Well, I'm going to make an assumption here, and you can clarify it from your perspective. I don't imagine that most law firms are purchased for cash.
They are not.
Yeah, they're not. And more than likely, there's either an earnout or a promissory note.
Correct. Right.
And if it's an earnout or promissory note, that payment to the seller has to come out of the profit.
That's correct. Every law firm pays for itself.
Perfect. And if that's the case, then the law firm must make enough money to compensate the new owner if they're active in the practice and compensate the seller. So the margin analysis is critical. It's not something that you're saying accidentally, well, hopefully you're profitable. You have to think it through from a financial perspective because the net will pay both parties, the seller and the buyer, if it's a classic note or kind of an earnout structure. So it's a critical element. Overcompensating non-owner associates can impact the value of the firm tremendously. Well done, Ed. Excellent point. Thank you for that. Any other mistakes you'd like to add? Or
I could do a whole podcast episode on different mistakes that we've seen, but I mean, just a kind of a quick overview would be, trying to sell pieces of the firm rather than the firm itself. So I've had a lot of conversations with people where they say, "Well, I want to sell my website, or I want to sell my telephone number, or something like that," right? And then they want money for the book as well, right? For their client book, and it's a whole, right? We can't break off the pieces and sell the different pieces. We sell it as a whole. It's an operating going concern business. So yeah, certainly that would be one.
yeah, it's a
And then
personal services business, which a lot of lawyers don't appreciate. It's not like you're selling, a contingent property that has four apartments on it and you can split 4 apartments and sell it. It's a personal services business. So you have to understand the model itself is personal services. So yeah, it's an excellent point.
and then I think the number one mistake that I would say is waiting until the last minute
Oh
to
my
try and
God.
figure out exit planning, right? I mean, I can't tell you the number of calls I get from lawyers who will say, "Oh, hey, I want to be out by December 31st," and here it is, July, and they're calling me. It's like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. This takes time.
Yeah. This is an excellent point. I used to teach a workshop. We used to teach a workshop in Atticus called the exit strategy. And it was a terrible workshop because it attracted older lawyers that wanted to be out in 6 months. And I'm with you. You just can't, you're not going to be able to find me they'll call us and say, "Hey, do you know a young lawyer who wants to buy my practice?" And I'm like, I don't know even how to begin to respond to this. And then you're like, "Okay, well, we'd like to go ahead and, have you hire us so we can, get your practice cleaned up so we can look at it." "No, I don't want to pay you. I'm just looking for somebody that you can introduce me to buy my practice." And you're like, "Well, there's liability issues. There's so many problems here. No, I'm not going to introduce you to anyone. You're a knucklehead. I'm not going to do it." So in your mind, ideally, I know what my answer is, but ideally, how long would you recommend to a lawyer to ramp up to get a practice ready for sale?
Well, I would like to see 5 years, right? At a minimum, 5 years. But have we done it with somebody who wants to leave in 3? Yes, we've done it with somebody who wants to leave in 3. If you get much less than 3, it is really difficult to go out and find a buyer. Now, if you have an internal buyer who is somebody who knows what they're doing, and that's really the key. They've got to know what they're doing. You probably could get it done in a year, right? But if you've got a junior associate, you need much more time than that. If you're trying to do an internal sale to a junior associate, they have to come up to speed not only in the practice area, but they also have to come up to speed on how to run a business. Those are two big things to learn.
I think that's the biggest mistake that I see a lot of attorneys make when they've hired this associate who's technically competent. I mean, they know they're a good lawyer, but they've got no project management experience, no marketing experience. They're not managing team. And if they are managing team, they're managing team poorly. They have no business skills. They have no comprehensive understanding of how a law firm works. They don't understand the rule of three. And it's one of the things I try and encourage a lot of our law firm owners to do. If you've got an associate that you think is semi decent, they don't have to be great, get them in with one of our programs. If you've got multiple associates, and I'm doing this with a law firm right now, we're trying to train up the associates who are incredibly resistant to any form of change. They're like, I'm doing great legal work. Why are you guys bothering me? And you're saying, hey, look, we're actually trying to groom you to be a partner. You're being looked as a partner. And so we want to talk to you about how you manage your time. We want to talk to you about how to ask your clients for referrals. We want to talk to you about how to manage interruptions, how to organize your life, how to have a great practice and a great life. And they're just bite tooth and nail. And the partners are like, what's wrong with them? I'm like, you hired the wrong lawyer.
Right. That is exactly right. You hired the wrong lawyer, and it's not going to work if they aren't already interested in that. It's not going to work.
Yeah, you hired somebody who wants a 9 to 5 job, do good legal work, and go home. This
Hmm.
is not someone who's partnership material. It's a completely, and like you, I've helped a lot of people acquire firms, merge firms, have junior partners. It's a big deal. It's a big mistake, and it's a big problem. I think you and I should schedule another episode where we do like the top 10 stupid things we do see lawyers do to wreck the value of their practice.
That would be an interesting episode, that's for sure.
Okay, I've got a tough one for you.
Sure.
So I got two tough questions. My first question is, it's easy to drive the bottom line profitability by working more. If you're advising a buyer, or if you're advising someone who's looking to sell their firm, let's say in 5 years, what would your advice be on taking time off? Good thing, bad thing? What would you say?
I would say it's a good thing because at the end of the day, if you can show a buyer that I live a life and this is the net income. So I'm not asking you to work 80 or 100 hours a week on the firm. I work 40 hours a week on the firm, and I've taken 6 weeks of vacation off, and this is the earning potential of the firm, or the actual earnings of the firm, not even potential. Then I think you've got a powerful firm there because you've got a firm that really allows the owner to get the benefit of being an owner of a law firm, right? So I love it. I think it's a great thing.
Okay, fantastic. Next question. And this is not a fair question, but if you're talking to a young lawyer that's probably, let's say, 30s or 40s, they've just opened up their own practice and they're trying to position it for sale by the time they're, let's say, 45 or 50, what's the number one thing that you're going to say focus on? Because you listed 5 core strategies. What's the first one that you said, hey, here's what I would do right now as you start to build? You don't have any employees, or you may have one employee. What's the number one piece of advice that you give them, Ed?
So if I change that question a little bit and I say, what's the process? The first thing I would do is hire your first employee and get all of the non-legal work off your plate, right? The second thing I would do is work a marketing system to have consistent deal flow so that you're always getting cases in and you're building up that authority and you're building up the relationships that are going to matter, because the relationships really are that annuity. And if you've got a 10 or 15 or 20-year runway, that annuity is the most important thing that you can build today. The second thing then, or third, I think I'm on, the third thing then would be to get the internal systems down, right?
Perfect. Perfect. So as we start to wrap up, I'm going to encourage you to tell people where to go to find more information about the brokerage, about your book, and about your thinking, and getting more access to the content. Where would you direct people?
So the first thing I'd say is go to lawfirmexitsuccess.com, lawfirmexitsuccess.com, and that you can download the book there. And it's an ebook, and just go ahead and download it, and then you'll get into our orbit. You'll get on our list, and we'll start communicating with you. If you want to get the newsletter, I'm happy to give you the newsletter. Just give us a call and talk to Victoria. She'll put you on the newsletter mailing list. We'd love to have you. And then in terms of contacting me, LinkedIn's a good way to go. So Ed Alexander in Orlando on LinkedIn.
Perfect. We'll put that link. We'll put your LinkedIn profile there. We'll put all your contact information there. And here's my last question for you. Ready? If you could go back and talk to young Ed as he started to open up his second practice. He sold his first one, but his second practice. What advice would you give that Ed now?
I would niche down a lot faster than I niche down, right? So I was really focused in on doing business law and doing that entrepreneurial piece. And I really didn't niche down into the vertical industry as fast as I should have. If I'd have done that early on, I'd done, I think, so it's always easy to say now because I'm in the thick of it, right? And so you go, oh, this was a great path, but to some extent, I'm a big Star Trek fan, right? So there's a great Star Trek episode where this might be a little bit off topic, but Captain Picard basically goes back to his youth to be able to redo every mistake he thought he had done in his youth, and then he came out at the end, and it was totally different life, not the life he wanted to live. It was a completely different life, right? And so, on some level, I have to temper that advice because I'm where I want to be today, and what I did before got me here. So if I made a change, would I end up being here? I don't know, but that's what I would probably do: is get into a niche much faster than I'd really gotten into the niche.
Okay, my friend. Great job today. Thanks for sharing your advice, your wisdom. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up?
No, thank you very much. I very much appreciate being on the podcast and love talking to you, Steve.
I think everyone's going to love this episode, and I appreciate your advice, your graciousness, your wisdom, and as always, thank you for being part of the Atticus Great Practice, Great Life community.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.